The crystal chandeliers in the wedding hall gleamed, the jazz music having just stopped mid-song. Amid the packed room I, Helen Carter, sprang to my feet, my voice cutting through the air. Stop serving the desserts at once. The whole room fell silent. Astonished looks and whispers began to ripple. David rushed over, grabbed my hand, bewildered. Mom, what are you doing? This is my wedding. Trembling, I pulled to order slips from my pocket. One read nut-free. The other, scrawled in a cold hand, read at almond brittle. I held them up, my voice wavering but resolute. If these desserts are served, Oliver will die right at this banquet table. The wedding hall erupted in murmurs, chairs scraping, guests exchanging glances. And in that moment I knew, behind those dazzling smiles, a conspiracy had truly been revealed. I stood there, a grandmother who had endured loss, who had promised her late daughter that she would protect her grandson's life at any cost. The story you are about to witness is not just about a wedding torn apart. It's about secrets hidden behind smiles, about love warped into control, and about a small woman determined not to let history repeat itself. If you want to know how a piece of cake can become a weapon, and who stood behind that glittering curtain, follow me deeper into the story. I will tell you everything. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd be so happy to connect with you. I have lived long enough to witness many weddings, moments of joy and moments of heartbreak. But that evening, inside the glass garden hall blazing with crystal light, my heart was anything but calm. Music swelled, the jazz trumpet curling between the soaring glass walls, reflecting lights that glittered like thousands of stars trapped inside a vast crystal box. Guests in lavish attire raised their champagne glasses in bursts of laughter. Everything seemed flawless, as if there were no room for a single worry to intrude. But to me, perfection was often just a coat of paint, one that could crack with the slightest knock. If I sat at table 6 with Oliver, my small 8-year-old grandson, he wore a silver gray suit, his tie slightly askew. I straightened it for him, my hand trembling more with emotion than with age. Oliver said nothing. He clutched his red toy car tightly, the one he had never let go of for as long as I could remember. Amid all the bustle, he was unusually silent, his dark brown eyes hiding behind long lashes, avoiding everyone's gaze. I bent down and whispered, "Are you tired, Oliver?" He gave a slight shake of his head, but his small shoulders curled inward. I recognized the familiar signal. He was withdrawing into himself, just as he always did when he missed his mother. I looked up, my eyes finding David, my son, busy among handshakes and congratulatory embraces. His well-fitted tuxedo made him look like a successful businessman stepping out of a magazine. But I knew better than anyone. Beneath that polished exterior lay fractures that had never healed. David had never truly recovered from Isabella's death. A guest clapped him on the shoulder, speaking loudly over the music. "You're a lucky man, David. Lily is a real queen." I turned to look at Lily, and indeed, she shone like a queen. Her ivory gown glittered with sequins, its train flowing beneath the chandeliers, drawing every eye toward her. Her golden hair cascaded in waves, her smile radiant, her lifted hand waving as though she were bestowing blessings. To others, Lily was hope incarnate. To me, there was a hollowness flickering behind those bright blue eyes. Perhaps it was only the prejudice of an old mother who had lost too much. But my instincts had never abandoned me. "Grandma," Oliver whispered, his voice as small as a breath. "Can we go home?" I froze. He rarely asked to leave before things were finished. I stroked his hair, forcing my voice to remain gentle. "Today is your father's happy day. We have to stay and celebrate." Oliver clutched the red car tighter, his eyes brimming. The jazz swelled, the laughter and chatter rising like crashing waves. And yet, within all that noise, I could hear my heartbeat clearly, each thud pounding like a drum, forewarning of something ill to come. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. Over the years, I had learned to read the silences, and in the dazzling glow of the glass garden that night, it was Oliver's silence that chilled me more than any melody could. Oliver sat beside me, clutching the red toy car tightly to his chest. Normally, he would whisper to me about imaginary races, about steering his car around the living room or building obstacle courses out of storybooks. But tonight, while the crystal lights shattered into 100 starbursts across the glass dome, Oliver was quiet, as if locked inside an invisible wall. I laid my wrinkled hand on his small shoulder. "Don't you want to talk to the other kids? They're your age too." Oliver only shook his head. His eyes drifted toward the dance floor, where Lily laughed radiantly, her pale, slender hand resting in David's. A sadness without a name flickered in his gaze. I knew he was thinking of his mother, Isabella. David tried to keep up appearances. I could see the way he smiled at every guest, shook hands, tilted his head just so, pretending to be cheerful. But I also saw the faint shadows beneath his eyes, traces of sleepless nights, of exhaustion no tuxedo could disguise. That was the burden of a man who had lost too much, now trying to convince himself the past had been folded away. An old family friend patted my shoulder, chuckling softly. "Helen, you must be so happy. Your son has found love again." I offered a polite smile, though inside me a sigh echoed. Happiness, when had it become so fragile? At the center of the hall, Lily twirled to the rhythm of jazz, her gown sweeping across the polished glass floor. Every gaze followed her, as though the entire room existed only to exalt her brilliance. I could not deny it. Lily knew how to inspire admiration. Her smile appeared at just the right moments, her voice soft as velvet when offering thanks. She was indeed the picture of the queen everyone expected at such a grand wedding. Yet even within that smile, I caught something else. The faint crease of her brow, the crack in her eyes when she noticed Oliver staring at her. I had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I knew the look of a woman who sensed she did not fully own a man's heart. And Lily, though wrapped in a bridal gown, still seemed like someone standing outside the door of David's memories. I bent toward Oliver and whispered, "Do you want to dance with Grandma?" He shook his head quickly, clutching the car tighter. A memory rushed back. Another evening, years ago. Isabella was alive then, and we had sat in a brightly lit room. Oliver, only 3 years old, toddled around the table, laughing gleefully. Isabella laughed with him, her eyes shimmering, as if that light existed only for her son. The memory stabbed my heart. I returned to the present, gazing at the small boy curled beside me. While the world was enchanted by Lily's glow, he remained wrapped in the shadow of his loss. A young guest approached our table, bending down with a smile. "Is this your grandson?" "He's adorable." Oliver said nothing. He pressed himself against me, burying his face in my sleeve. I stroked his back, covering with a smile. "He's just a little shy." As the guest walked away, I heard a bright peal of laughter from the dance floor. Lily had tilted her head back, her golden hair glittering beneath the chandelier. She seemed to be announcing to the entire hall that this was her stage, that she had triumphed over the shadow of a woman long gone. But my eyes returned to Oliver, the child so silent it was heartbreaking in that moment. I thought to myself, if Isabella were still alive, Oliver would never feel this lost. The jazz quickened, guests clapping in unison. I forced a smile, but my heart was heavy. The grand wedding felt like an opulent play, and there we were, Oliver and I, sitting quietly in a corner, holding tight to the truth that sometimes the brightest lights concealed the most dangerous shadows. I was still tangled in my own emotions when suddenly, Oliver gripped my hand tightly. His small fingers trembled, clinging to my wrinkled ones as though they were the only lifeline left. His voice was so faint that only I could hear it, buried beneath the blare of jazz horns and bursts of laughter. "Grandma, we have to leave." I startled, leaning down to look at him. His face was pale, eyes wide, filled with tension. Not the kind of whining when a child wants to go home. No, this was panic. The same look I had seen when he had an allergic reaction, back when Isabella had to rush out in the middle of the night to take him to the hospital. What is it, Oliver? Did you see something? He shook his head, lips barely moving. I knew he was afraid that speaking too loudly would draw attention. I bent lower, hearing the pounding of my own heart, forcing my voice to stay calm. Tell Grandma. What happened? Oliver swallowed hard, clutching his red toy car so tightly I could hear the plastic creak. Then he whispered, I saw them switch my card. The words cut through the glittering air like a cold blade. For a moment, the laughter and chatter around us blurred into a haze. I stared at him, trying to process every syllable. Switch the card. I bent down, sliding my hand beneath the table. My knee knocked against the edge, but I didn't care. The shimmering lights above could not reach into that shadow. Yet my fingers brushed against a scrap of paper. I pulled it out, folded in quarters, slightly crumpled, fresh blue ink streaked across it. I opened it. Clear capital letters stared back at me. Almond brittle. My heart dropped. My throat tightened. Oliver had a severe almond allergy. Everyone in the family knew. Doctors and schools had it documented. Even the tiniest crumb, a trace left in a pastry, was enough to push him into a life-threatening crisis. I stared at the label in my hand, the chandelier's glow reflecting on it like a piece of damning evidence. Looking up, I caught Oliver's gaze. He understood, and he was terrified in an instant. Memories flooded back. 4 years ago, on a winter night, Oliver had gone into shock from a cookie laced with almond crumbs. Isabella had called me, her voice breaking. Mom, I don't know what to do. He can't breathe. I remembered rushing to meet them, holding Oliver in the car on the way to the hospital, his lips turning purple, my heart nearly stopping with his. That night we sat by his hospital bed until dawn. Isabella had gripped my hand, eyes brimming, whispering, Mom, if anything ever happens to him, I don't know if I could survive it. I blinked hard, pushing the searing memory away. Back in the present, I knew what I held in my hand was no accident. At this glittering wedding banquet, there was a hidden hand intent on pushing Oliver toward danger. I drew in a breath, forcing a strained smile when a guest turned to ask, Helen, is the boy all right? I nodded, hiding the slip of paper in my palm. Oliver still clung to my hand, his whole body taut like a small animal sensing a trap. Beneath the glittering light, I suddenly felt misplaced, as if standing between two worlds. On one side, laughter and clinking glasses. On the other, the searing truth burning in the palm of my hand. I bent down and whispered, I'm here. No one will touch you. Oliver gave a slight nod, but his eyes stayed locked on the serving table, where silver trays gleamed, lined up and waiting to carry out the desserts. And in that instant, I knew tonight would no longer be an ordinary wedding night. Oliver gripped my hand tighter, his voice trembling once more, this time like a whisper drowned beneath the jazz. I saw them switch my card. I saw it with my own eyes. I froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, but those tear-bright eyes could not lie. My chest tightened, breath caught in my lungs. Are you sure? I whispered, squeezing his small hand gently. Oliver nodded, lips pressed tight, shoulders trembling. I glanced around the hall. The revelry carried on, unbroken. Gowns swept across the polished glass floor, champagne flutes clinked, laughter mingled with music. No one realized that beneath all this glitter, a child sat at a table, facing a danger that could steal his life in mere minutes. I inhaled deeply, holding back the tremor in my voice. All right, I understand. Just stay here with me. I pressed the slip-marked almond brittle into my palm, squeezing so tightly my fingers ached. It felt as if I were holding a tiny bomb, one that could detonate at any moment. In that moment, another memory surged back. The time when Oliver was only 6, and his elementary school carelessly handed him a cupcake that was supposed to be safe. Within minutes, his lips had swollen, his throat closing, his breath rasping like wind through a crack in the door. I still remembered Isabella's terrified scream. "Call an ambulance. Hurry!" That nightmare had never left us. And now, here I was again, in the middle of a lavish wedding, holding proof that someone was trying to replay that scene. I looked up at David. He was smiling, shaking hands with an old colleague, completely unaware. Then my gaze fell on Lily, the new bride. Her radiant smile, her arm raised to greet the guests. She shone so brightly that every eye in the room was drawn to her. But deep within me, a premonition stirred. If anyone wanted Oliver gone, she had a reason. I shook my head, forcing the thought aside. No evidence, no words spoken aloud. But a grandmother's heart needs neither law nor proof to sense danger. "Oliver," I whispered, "did you see who switched the card?" He bit his lip, shaking his head. I didn't see their face. I only saw a hand, putting it down. And then the card was switched. I swallowed hard. So it wasn't just imagination. An 8-year-old couldn't invent something like this. As laughter rang all around me, I felt cut off from the entire hall. The air grew suffocating. The chandeliers above glittered, but coldly, as if everything around us were just a stage. And we, Oliver and I, were seated at the edge of an abyss. A middle-aged couple passed by, smiling warmly. "Oh, what a darling boy." I forced a polite reply, hiding the slip of paper in my palm. They walked away, unaware that this very table held a deadly secret. Oliver whispered, "Do you believe me, Grandma?" I bent down, meeting his eyes. "Of course. I always believe you." Tears shimmered at the corners of his eyes, as if a part of his fear had finally lifted. I straightened, scanning the room. The dessert trays were already lined up at the far end of the hall. The faint sweetness of caramel and chocolate drifted through the air. Among them, if there truly was an almond brittle dish, a single touch would be enough to take Oliver's chance at life away. I knew then. From this moment on, I could not sit still. The jazz band shifted to a new tune, applause breaking out across the hall. But all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the heart of a grandmother, sounding the alarm, while the rest of the world carelessly raised their glasses, laughing as if nothing were wrong. Tonight, I would have to keep watch, at any cost. As my fingers tightened around Oliver's small hand, a wave of memories surged back so strongly it almost took my breath away. I saw Isabella, my daughter-in-law, David's first wife, Oliver's mother. The first day David brought her home, I was struck by the gentleness that radiated from her. It wasn't only her outer beauty, but a light from within, warm and sincere. When she held my hand, her eyes sparkling, and called me Mom from that very first meeting, I knew my life had gained another daughter. And truly, Isabella lived that way. I never once felt the tension of a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. She listened when I told her about family recipes, patiently learning how to bake the apple pie I used to make for David as a boy. Once, I told her, "You don't have to trouble yourself so much. It's just a pie." She laughed, wiping sweat from her brow. "No, Mom, I want Oliver to grow up remembering the smell of pie the same way David did. I want him to feel wrapped in love." Remembering that now tightened my chest. One night, when Oliver was 5, he burned with a high fever. The thermometer was blazing red. I rushed to my son's house the moment I got the call. I still remember Isabella sitting by the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her eyes red and swollen but her hand never leaving her child's. She looked at me, frantic. "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore. He keeps shivering, his shirt is soaked." I sat beside her, pressing a cool cloth to Oliver's forehead. We took turns wiping away sweat, coaxing him to sip water in tiny gulps. That whole night, neither of us closed our eyes. When dawn broke, Oliver's fever subsided. His breathing grew steady. Isabella let out a long breath and collapsed against my shoulder, whispering through tears, I'm so afraid of losing him. Mom, I held her and remember saying, no one is ever lost when love is this strong. That was how Isabella and I bonded, through sleepless nights, through tears, through the shared fears of motherhood. I never thought of her as merely my son's wife. She was my daughter, a child of my heart, if not of my blood. Now, sitting in the hall blazing with lights, I heard laughter, music, yet inside me echoed the vision of Isabella softly singing Oliver to sleep after a nightmare. Her voice as light as a breeze, her arms cradling him close, her eyes glancing toward me as if to say, Mom, thank you for always being here. Oliver, my little one, clung to me today just as he once clung to his mother, and that was what made my heart ache. He once had that tender love, stolen away far too soon. I looked around. Lily glittered like a queen, but to Oliver, she could never fill the emptiness Isabella had left behind. And to me, that truth was clearer than ever. I bent down, whispering into Oliver's ear, you know, your mother used to call you her little light. Wherever she is, she will always watch over you. Oliver looked up at me, his eyes rimmed red, but the corners of his mouth lifted slightly, as though he were remembering something familiar. I smoothed his soft hair, and, inside, I made a promise. If Isabella could no longer be here to protect him, then I would do it in her stead. No, I must do it in her stead. I remembered vividly the moment Oliver first cried out in the world. Isabella lay there, exhausted but radiant with joy. She held my hand, her eyes shining. Mom, thank you. We have Oliver now. I had cried. Cried at seeing my son become a father. Cried at having another small life to love. From that moment on, Oliver felt like part of my own flesh and blood. What I felt for him was not simply a grandmother's love for her grandson. It was deeper than that, like a silent promise I had made to Isabella. I will protect your boy, no matter what it costs me. Whenever Isabella was busy, I would go to pick Oliver up from preschool. He would come running, small arms outstretched, his little backpack bouncing behind him. That hug was enough to melt away the years from my bones. I still remember telling him fairy tales, his small voice interrupting, Grandma, but Mommy says dragons aren't real. I would laugh, thinking, this boy is as clever as his mother. But that happiness was short-lived. The accident came on a gray, rainy morning. Isabella was on her way to pick Oliver up from art class when the car skidded out of control. The call from the hospital tore through me like a blade. When I arrived, I had only enough time to hold her cooling hand. David stood there like a statue, his eyes hollow, while Oliver slept at home, unaware that when he woke, he would never see his mother again. From that day, David shut himself off. He buried himself in work, in business trips, in contracts signed in haste. I once told him, son, grief can't be buried under work. But David only replied, his voice hoarse, if I stop, Mom, I'll fall apart. Oliver was different. He couldn't bury the emptiness in work. He had only one way, to cling tightly to those who remained. And the ones closest to him were me. And Grace, my adopted daughter, entered Oliver's life like a warm breeze. She would sit patiently for hours, teaching him to draw crooked little pictures, baking nut-free cookies with him, taking him to the park to fly kites. There were nights when Oliver would wake crying for his mother, and I would rush into the room, only to find Grace already there, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding him close. Once, as I passed the hallway, I heard Oliver sobbing, Auntie Grace, why isn't Mommy coming back? And Grace, her eyes wet, gently kissed his hair. Your Mommy is in the sky, watching you. But you have Grandma, you have me. We will never let you be alone. That promise was not only for Oliver. It was for me too. I knew Grace loved him as if he were her own child. From then on, my bond with Oliver grew even deeper. Every step, every laugh, every hug reminded me of Isabella. In Oliver I saw his mother's eyes, her smile. even the way he tilted his head when concentrating. That was why Oliver was not just my grandson. He was the thread that tied me to Isabella, the living memory of the daughter I had lost. But for that very reason, I lived in fear. Fear that the world might once again tear him from my arms. And tonight, sitting in this dazzling wedding hall, his small trembling hand inside mine, that fear felt as though it were coming true. I leaned close, whispering into Oliver's ear, "You are everything to me, my dear boy. I swear, no one will ever harm you." He pressed his head against my shoulder, silent. But I could feel it. He believed me, and it was that belief that made me stronger than I had ever been. When I think back to the days after Isabella's death, I cannot leave out one name: Grace. Grace was not my biological daughter. She came into my life from another chapter, a 10-year-old girl with tangled brown hair, wide but silent eyes, whom I adopted from an orphanage. At the time, I thought I was simply giving a child a chance. But I never imagined that years later, Grace would become an irreplaceable part of our family. And more than that, a warm wall between Oliver and me. Grace loved Oliver with all her heart. Even before Isabella passed, I had seen how close they were, like two pieces that naturally fit. Once, I even joked, if people didn't know better, they'd think you two were siblings. Grace laughed, her eyes sparkling. I'd like Oliver to think of me as his sister. After Isabella's funeral, when David drowned himself in work, Grace quietly stepped in to fill the void. No one told her to. No one assigned her the responsibility. Yet every morning, she picked Oliver up from school. Every afternoon, she took him to the park, sitting for hours on a wooden bench beneath the red blaze of maple leaves, listening as he spun stories about imaginary adventures with his red toy car. Once, I followed them to the park. Oliver ran ahead, shouting, "Auntie Grace, catch me if you can." Grace pretended to stumble, chasing after him, her laughter mingling with the wind. I stayed back, watching, feeling a rare moment of peace in those heavy days at home. Grace often took to the kitchen. She learned to bake nut-free treats, reading every label with care, determined that Oliver would never be at risk. The oven filled the house with sweet aromas, and Oliver was always the first waiting at its door, his eyes wide with anticipation. When the golden cake came out, he would squeal with delight and fling his arms around Grace. "You're the best." That hug had the power to soothe every shadow in my heart. Grace also taught Oliver to paint. On the old wooden table in the living room, they sat side by side, their hands stained with watercolor. Oliver painted red cars, the maple tree in the park, or a house with 3 figures standing together. One with silver hair me, one with brown hair Grace, and a smiling boy. At times, I quietly studied those drawings, my heart aching at the empty space where Isabella should have been. But at the same time, I knew Oliver was finding a new family, a new safety, in Grace's embrace. What comforted me most was his laughter. After Isabella's death, Oliver rarely laughed, but with Grace, his laughter returned. Sometimes he laughed so hard he toppled back in his chair, clutching his stomach, while Grace laughed with tears streaming down her face. Those sounds filled the house, chasing away the heavy silence that had lingered since Isabella was gone. I once asked Grace, "Don't you ever get tired? Spending all your time with the boy, worrying about every meal, every night's sleep?" She smiled, shaking her head. "No, Mom. Oliver feels like part of me now. I want him to know that there will always be someone here for him." Her simple words left me choked with emotion. In Grace, I saw a love that was quiet yet enduring. She never tried to replace Isabella, yet somehow became Oliver's anchor. And that was why I always felt more at peace knowing Oliver was with her. While the world outside could waver, betray, or deceive, between those two there existed something unshakable, pure love. Sometimes I thought, if Oliver was my very life, then Grace was the pair of hands helping me hold on to that life. There was one thing I had never spoken aloud, not even to Grace herself. I knew she loved David in silence. When that love began, I could not tell. Perhaps it was in the afternoons she helped me fold documents to send to David's office, or the times she lingered by the window, watching him drive away. Her eyes in those moments were different, tender, longing. Grace never revealed it, but I was a mother. I could see. One evening, I found her at the kitchen table, a cup of tea gone cold before her, staring at the old photograph of David and Isabella on the shelf. When I stepped in, she quickly turned away, her voice unsteady. I was just missing her. I nodded, though inside I understood. It wasn't only Isabella she missed. There was another yearning, buried deep, Grace never let David see. She treated him like a gentle, caring sister, always worrying after him. But during dinners, when David and Lily spoke together, I noticed Grace's eyes dim slightly. Only for a moment. Then she would smile, serving food to Oliver as if nothing had happened. I knew. Deep down, she harbored a quiet jealousy toward Lily. How could she not? Lily swept into David's life like a storm of light, capturing every glance, every compliment. Grace, meanwhile, remained in the background, caring for a child, keeping the home warm. One was dazzling, the other steadfast. I could not blame Grace when bitterness flickered in her eyes. Once, I saw her pause at the living room doorway, watching Lily rest her head on David's shoulder as they laughed with guests. Oliver came running, tugging at Grace's hand, his voice innocent. "Auntie, come play with me." She bent down, scooped him into her arms, and forced a smile. "Yes, I'm here with you." And in that moment, I realized she had made her choice. Grace pushed away her jealousy, her silent love, and placed Oliver above all else. That was why I called Grace the candle. Not a blazing light, not something that drew admiration, but a small, patient flame that never went out, always keeping the home warm. She never boasted, never competed. She simply glowed quietly when darkness threatened to consume us. In the months when David was drowning in grief, when Lily was busy polishing her perfect image, and when my own body was growing frail, it was Grace who kept this family from collapsing. She shielded Oliver, cared for every meal and every night's sleep, mended David's torn shirts he never noticed. On many sleepless nights, I watched her silhouette moving softly through the house, switching off the living room light, adjusting Oliver's blanket, only then retreating to her own room. And I thought, without her, we would have lost everything. David might never know there was a heart quietly devoted to him. Grace might never be recognized as a wife, as a mother. But I knew this. In Oliver's eyes, Aunt Grace was his strong wall. And in mine, she was the small miracle God had sent to keep this family from sinking into the dark. I still remember that afternoon, the day David first brought Lily home. The late autumn sun streamed pale gold through the living room window, casting light across the old beige sofa and the wooden tea table I had cherished for years. I had just finished brewing a pot of mint tea when David walked in, holding the hand of a young woman. "Mom, this is Lily," David said, his voice carrying a trace of hope, as if he were offering me a cure. "I think you'll like her." I saw Lily for the first time in that light. She was beautiful, not the sharp kind of beauty that intimidated, but the sort that knew how to draw attention. Golden waves of hair, bright blue eyes like a summer lake, and a smile poised just so. Lily stepped forward and extended her hand. "It's such a pleasure to meet you. David has told me so much about you, and about Oliver, too." Her voice was smooth as silk. I shook her hand, nodded slightly, keeping my composure. A mother's instincts are rarely wrong, and mine were already weighing each word, each gesture of this young woman. It didn't take long for Lily to settle in. Within minutes, she had praised the family portrait on the wall, asked about the roses in the front garden, and even mentioned my famous apple pie. Strangers often take months to break through hesitance, but not Lily. She was deft, polished, always saying just enough to win favor. The guests visiting that day, our neighbors, an old friend of David's, were quickly charmed. They laughed and chatted with her, turning to David with approving smiles. "You're a lucky man." David smiled, that relieved smile I hadn't seen on him since Isabella died. I sat quietly, watching it all, a knot of unease forming in me. Oliver sat in the corner, clutching his red toy car, his eyes fixed on the wooden floor. I knew he struggled to accept strangers, especially anyone who might take his mother's place. Lily seemed to notice. She walked over, crouched down, her smile bright. "Oliver, I have something for you." From her handbag, she pulled out a golden-wrapped chocolate bar, holding it out in front of him. I froze. Oliver glanced up, looked at it for a second, then shook his head, clutching his car tighter, not even reaching for the treat. In that instant, Lily's smile faltered. Only for a moment, but I saw it. Her lips stiffened. Her eyes flashed with something that was not gentleness. Then, just as quickly, she laughed lightly, her voice airy. "Oh dear, maybe you don't like sweets." I watched in silence. No matter how skilled, people cannot mask their reflexes in a split second. And I realized, Oliver, with his child's instinct, had rejected her from the very first meeting. David, of course, noticed nothing. He patted his son's shoulder, gently scolding, "Be polite, son." Oliver didn't reply. He only moved closer to me, his dark eyes shining with defiance and fear. I slipped an arm around him, my gaze never leaving Lily in that moment. Two worlds seemed to stand apart. On one side, David and his friends laughing, convinced Lily was hope, a bright chapter after tragedy. On the other, Oliver, guarded, his red car clutched like a shield, and I, caught in between, knowing that every new hope could still carry a fracture. I still remember Lily's smile when Oliver refused the chocolate. It was no longer confident or charming. For the briefest heartbeat, her mouth twisted, her eyes darkened, like a crack spreading across glass. I believe almost no one else noticed. They were too busy talking, drinking, praising. But I saw it, and the image has never left me, just a single shake of an 8-year-old's head. Yet it was enough to tilt the perfect fade. That alone unsettled me. David, however, was different. My son seemed blind to that fleeting moment. In his eyes, Lily was hope reborn. That evening, after the guests had left, David sat across from me, his face set with determination. "Mom, I know. Everything after Isabella's death has been hard, but Lily, she makes me feel like I can breathe again." I looked straight into his eyes. There, I saw a man exhausted, clinging to a sliver of light to keep from being swallowed by darkness. I didn't want to snuff out the fragile flame he had just found, so I nodded, softening my voice. "If you're happy, then I'm at peace." But the truth was, I was anything but. I tried to open my heart. I truly did. I brewed another pot of tea and invited Lily to stay and talk after the others left. We spoke of ordinary things. Her job in advertising, her fondness for romantic novels, the trips she had taken. Lily was skilled at keeping a conversation flowing, graceful in her compliments, and careful to make me feel included, part of my reason. Admitted, this was a woman who knew how to behave, who could bring David some joy again. But my intuition, the instinct honed through years of being a mother and grandmother, whispered that something was off. I noticed Lily did not look at Oliver much. She could charm David's friends with ease, chat sweetly with the neighbors. But with the boy, her eyes often slid away, or flicked toward him only briefly, as if each glance reminded her of something unpleasant. I saw Oliver watching her in return, his gaze questioning. "Grandma, do you see this too?" And though I tried to reassure him, I could not dismiss what I felt. The next day, David called. his voice brimming with rare enthusiasm. "I think Lily can bring happiness to the whole family. You feel that too, don't you, Mom?" I stayed silent for a few seconds, then replied simply, "As long as you're certain it's what you truly want." I didn't want to disappoint him. Yet inside me, worries smoldered like embers refusing to die. After that first meeting, Lily began appearing more often in our home. She brought flowers, sometimes cooked a new dish, or sat beside David in the living room while he worked. Each time, I remained polite, smiling, but inwardly I was always watching, listening for the smallest detail. Oliver grew more withdrawn. He still clutched his red toy car, still turned to Grace when he needed laughter, but around Lily, he kept a clear distance. I once advised him, "Sweetheart, Lily wants to be your friend. Why don't you try giving her a chance?" Oliver stayed silent, then whispered, "I don't need her, Grandma. I only need you and Aunt Grace." Hearing that, my heart clenched. I knew feelings could not be forced, but I also knew a family could never be built on the foundation of unease. In the house that once echoed with Isabella's laughter, there was now a new sound, bright, practiced, charming, yet to me, somehow out of tune. I tried to open my heart, to believe I could welcome someone new. But every time my eyes caught the slight twist in Lily's smile when Oliver pulled away, I shuddered. David's fragile hope, Oliver's guarded silence, and my own gnawing misgivings. All of it wove together like a thin rope, stretched tight between us. And I knew, sooner or later, that rope would be pulled to the breaking point. One spring afternoon, David called me, his voice unusually cheerful. "Mom, today Lily's taking Oliver to the park. She wants to get closer to him. I think it's a good opportunity." I listened, my heart torn between hope and worry. Oliver had always been wary of Lily, but I wanted him to have moments of joy outdoors too. So I reminded him again and again, "Make sure you check his food. Don't let him touch anything with nuts." David laughed, confident. "I know, Mom. Don't worry." That evening, the front door opened. Oliver walked in, his white shirt streaked with mud, a tear in his jeans at the knee. What worried me most, though, was his face, silent, hollow-eyed, clutching his red toy car. Normally, he would rush to tell me how high his kite had flown, or how many times he had tumbled down the slide. But tonight, not a word. I bent down, stroking his hair. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Oliver only lowered his head, burrowing into my arm. Moments later, Lily stepped inside. Her high heels bore smudges of dirt, yet her lips stretched into a stiff smile. He had so much fun, running everywhere, never staying still. Such a bundle of energy. The way she emphasized so much energy made me uneasy. Her tone wasn't delight. It was strained, edged with irritation. I glanced at Oliver, still curled into my sleeve, and my unease deepened. After dinner, when everyone had dispersed, I caught whispers in the hallway. I stood still, not meaning to eavesdrop, but the words carried too clearly. Lily's voice, sharp, cold, so unlike the one she used in front of David. "Don't make trouble. You naughty boy. I told you to do as you're told." A pause. Then the sound of a sharp inhale, like Oliver holding back tears. My heart sank. I froze behind the door, torn apart inside. Part of me wanted to burst in, shield my grandson, confront Lily at once. But another part restrained me. I needed certainty. I had to see the truth with my own eyes before I spoke. David was blind, bewitched by Lily's queenly image. If I relied only on Oliver's words or my instincts, he would accuse me of prejudice. I turned away, walking slowly back to my room, my chest heavy as stone. In the dark, those words echoed in my head, over and over, stealing my sleep through the night. The next morning, Oliver sat at the breakfast table with Grace and me. He didn't touch his spoonful of cereal, only fiddled with his red toy car. Grace leaned closer and asked gently, Oliver, did you have fun yesterday? Oliver lifted his head, his eyes swollen. He only shook it. Grace looked at me, her eyes full of questions. I shook my head slightly, signaling that I would explain later. Inside me, a vague fear was solidifying into something undeniable. Lily was not the woman David imagined. And worse, my unease no longer came only from instinct, but from the very words I had heard with my own ears. I stood in the doorway, trying to keep my expression calm. Lily, having just snapped in a cold voice, noticed me. Instantly, like a switch flipped, her tone turned impossibly sweet. Oh, Helen, you're here. She smiled, her voice honey smooth. I was just telling Oliver to be a little obedient. Children can be stubborn sometimes, but truly, he's such a darling. I didn't answer right away. My eyes stayed on Oliver, standing beside her. He looked at me with frightened, pleading eyes, as if to say, Grandma, do you see this? Do you believe me? My heart ached. I longed to pull him into my arms, but I knew if I did that right then, in front of Lily, my suspicion would be laid bare. Instead, I gave a small nod, smiling thinly. I heard, children need patience. Lily, of course, she replied quickly, her smile stretching wider, though her eyes hadn't quite hidden the flicker of unease. Oliver edged closer, clutching at my sleeve. I laid my hand gently on his soft hair, stroking as if to say, I'm here. I believe you. When Lily finally walked away, her heels clicking sharply across the floor, I knelt to meet Oliver's eyes. He bit his lip, tears shimmering at the corners but refusing to fall. I whispered, You don't need to say a word. I've seen enough. Oliver threw himself into my arms, clinging tight. I sat still, listening to the frantic thud of his little heartbeat against my chest. In that moment, I knew beyond doubt, his fear was not imagination. From that day on, I began watching more closely. I noticed how Lily spoke to Oliver in front of others. Gentle, patient, showering him with praise like a fairy godmother. But when she thought no one was looking, her eyes hardened, her lips pressed thin. Another time, I caught her while Oliver was coloring. She stood behind him, voice sharp and shrill. Clean this up now. Stop making a mess. These scribbles aren't pretty at all. But when I stepped into the room, she immediately switched tones. Oh, look at this, Helen. Oliver is so talented. Such creativity. Each time it happened, I strung the fragments together, and they all pointed to a picture darker than I wanted to admit. That night, I lay awake, Isabella's image flooding my mind, her tender eyes as she held her son. I heard again her whisper on the night Oliver burned with fever. Mom, if anything ever happens to me, please protect Oliver for me. I blinked, tears spilling down my cheeks. I knew I could not sit still any longer. Lily might deceive David, might win over guests with her dazzling smile, but she could never outwit a grandmother's heart. Oliver was calling out to me with his eyes, and I could not leave him to fight alone. From that moment, my doubts were no longer vague instinct. They hardened into resolve. I would protect my grandson at any cost. Oliver's 9th birthday arrived on one of those rare, clear sky days. From early morning, the kitchen was alive with the smell of butter and sugar melting. Grace stood by the oven, her hair tied back, her coat dusted with flour. She carefully checked every ingredient, reading labels like a ritual she knew by heart. No nuts, no almond butter, not a trace of anything that could endanger Oliver. I stood watching, my heart swelling with quiet gratitude. While many dismissed allergies as an inconvenience, Grace treated it as a solemn duty. She never took it lightly. Oliver darted around the kitchen, his eyes glowing like candles waiting to be lit. When the cake was ready, the sweet aroma filled the house, and he shouted with delight, Aunt Grace, I smell it already. Grace smiled, slipped on her oven mitts, and gently placed the golden cake on the table. It was simple, no elaborate decoration, Just smooth vanilla frosting with a few fresh strawberries on top. Oliver flung his arms around her, hugging so tightly she laughed. Hey now, let me breathe. I love you, Auntie, he said, his voice clear as a bell. The moment caught in my chest. Watching them, I thought, if Isabella were here, surely she would smile in peace, knowing someone loved her son with such simple, complete devotion. The guests were few, a couple of neighbors, one or two of Oliver's classmates. The room filled with warmth, children's laughter mixing with the sweet scent of cake. I saw Oliver laughing more than I had in so long, running around the table, proudly showing off his red toy car. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen in ages. Unforced, unguarded. Then Lily arrived. A sleek, fitted dress, golden hair gleaming. She stepped into the humble little gathering like she had wandered onto the wrong stage. Her smile was light, her voice sweet but lacking warmth. Happy birthday, Oliver. She stayed at a distance. No gift, no move closer. Her gaze skimmed over the cake, the noisy children, then landed on David. As if seeking his approval, Oliver, clinging to Grace's shoulder, edged behind her, offering no reply. The cheerful mood faltered. I saw Lily stiffen, her smile slipping askew. David, perhaps worried his new wife might feel slighted, spoke sternly. Oliver, that's not acceptable. Lily just wished you a happy birthday. You need to thank her. Oliver stayed silent, lips pressed tight. He turned to me, his eyes confused, pleading. I shook my head gently, signaling that he didn't need to force himself. But David's brow furrowed deeper. Son, I didn't raise you to be impolite. I wanted to speak, to say that manners cannot be commanded, that affection cannot grow from a forced thank you. But I swallowed the words. I stayed silent, knowing that if I spoke, it would only trap Oliver further between two fires. Grace placed a hand on David's shoulder, her voice gentle. Let me handle it. Today is Oliver's special day. She bent down, whispering to her nephew. It's all right, sweetheart. Just be happy in your own way. Oliver looked at her, then smiled faintly. That small smile alone eased the tension in the room. But inside me, a crack had formed, sharp and undeniable. In a room filled with the scent of cake and children's laughter, I saw a painful contrast. Grace's genuine love brought Oliver's smile, while Lily's presence cast only coldness. And worse still, David stood by Lily's side, blind to the pleading look in his son's eyes. From that day, I knew this family had turned onto a dangerous curve. As the party wound down, the guests left, and the house was filled only with the clatter of tidying up and the lingering sweetness of cake. I remained at the table, staring at the scattered wrapping paper, while Oliver curled up in a corner with his red toy car, as if he wished to disappear into the shadows between the walls. In that silence, a memory rang in my ears, a whisper I had once overheard from Lily, weeks earlier, when she thought no one was listening. Just a little almond won't hurt. That sentence had chilled my skin the moment I heard it. I knew that for Oliver, even a trace could mean life or death. At the time, I told myself I might have misheard, or that perhaps Lily had spoken carelessly, not realizing the severity. But tonight, seeing how Oliver shrank from her gaze, my heart clenched with a terrible certainty. I had not misheard. Lily stepped into the room, her high heels clicking across the wooden floor. She looked at Oliver, smiling sweetly as always, but Oliver immediately turned away, burying his face into Grace's shoulder, refusing to respond. I saw his small shoulders shiver. Oliver, don't you want to thank Aunt Lily for coming? Her voice dripped with a sweetness so forced it was almost sour. Oliver stayed silent. He hugged his car tighter, eyes fixed on the floor. A child can pretend many things, but never hide true fear. The air in the room thickened. David walked in, saw the scene, and frowned. Oliver, I told you already. You must be polite. I touched David's arm lightly, shaking my head as I spoke softly. Son, let him be. It's his birthday. Don't force him. David sighed, leaning back in his chair, perhaps weary. Lily forced a smile, but her eyes flashed with irritation. A flicker only I caught. Late that night, when the house had gone quiet, I walked down the dark hallway toward my room. Through a door left slightly ajar, I saw Oliver lying in bed, clutching his red toy car, eyes wide open in the dark. I pushed the door gently and sat down beside him. "Can't you sleep, sweetheart?" I whispered. Oliver shook his head. After a long silence, he spoke softly, his voice trembling. "I don't want to eat cake if Aunt Lily is there. I'm scared." Tears welled in my eyes, but I held them back, stroking his hair. "I understand. You don't have to eat anything if you don't feel safe. I promise I'll always be right here with you." Oliver gave a small nod, then buried his face in my chest. I sat there for a long time, listening to his fragile breaths, while inside me a storm raged. From that night on, I could no longer brush aside my doubts. They clung to me every hour, every minute, like a shadow that refused to let go. I remembered Isabella's words when she was alive, gazing at Oliver as he slept. "Mom, if anything ever happens to me, please care for him as if he were your very life." Now I knew. That promise had become the red thread running through my life. And I also knew darkness had already crept into this family, hiding beneath the dazzling, seductive mask of Lily. From that birthday onward, my fear was no longer vague. It had carved itself into shape, impossible to erase. I had to keep my eyes wide open, to heed every signal from Oliver, because my instincts told me the day of danger was drawing nearer than ever. One afternoon, as the late sunlight streamed through the living room window, I caught sight of Lily standing alone before the picture on the wall. It was a photo of Isabella, her soft black hair falling over her shoulders, her gentle smile, her eyes radiating a light that seemed to warm the whole room. She was holding baby Oliver in her arms, while David stood beside her, his hand around her shoulders, his gaze full of pride. Lily didn't know I was nearby. She stood there for a long moment, her shoulders rigid. Her eyes darkened as they slid from Isabella's face to the child in the frame, then to David. Gone was the radiance she wore so easily before others. What remained was bitterness, raw and unguarded. "She's always here," Lily whispered, her voice heavy as a sigh. "Even after she's dead." I stepped back, not wanting her to realize I was there. And just then, the door opened softly. Anna, Lily's younger sister, entered. She was still so young, with gentle eyes that always seemed anxious, her slight figure carrying the air of someone forever apologizing for existing. Anna looked at her sister, asking quietly, "You're standing here again?" Lily turned, forcing a smile onto her lips, though her voice was cold as steel. "As long as David remembers Isabella, I'll always be just a shadow." Anna moved closer, nervously laying a trembling hand on her sister's arm. "But Oliver, he's just a child. It's not his fault." Lily gave a short, brittle laugh. "He's the reason David remembers Isabella every single day. Don't you see? His eyes, his smile. Everything about him is Isabella. Every time David looks at Oliver, he doesn't see his son. He sees the past." Anna swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. I think you're worrying too much. David chose you, didn't he?" "Chose?" Lily's lips twisted, her eyes flashing with scorn. "You don't understand. A man can marry you, can take you along, but his heart is another matter. If David's heart still belongs to Isabella, then all I have is this empty shell of a role." The room fell into silence. I stood in the hallway, my heart hammering. Lily's words cut through the air like a cold blade, revealing the fracture inside her soul. It wasn't love that consumed her, but jealousy, insecurity, and the hunger for control. Anna murmured softly, "But, sister, how can you blame a child just because he looks like his mother? Oliver hasn't done anything." Lily turned to her, her icy stare making Anna flinch. You don't understand. As long as Oliver is here, I will never truly be the only one in David's eyes. I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself, my chest tightening. That confession was more than worry. It was a warning. A woman harboring jealousy toward a child was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. I retreated to my room, my heart heavy as stone. Now I saw it clearly. Lily wasn't merely insecure. She was drowning in a battle against a woman already gone. And Oliver, innocent and small, had been dragged into the fight as the living reminder. I can still remember Lily's voice that day, low and cold, slicing through the air like a knife. He's the one who reminds David of the past every single day. Anna stood frozen, clutching the hem of her blouse, her eyes wide with confusion. She wanted to say something. I could see it in her trembling lips, but stopped herself. In their relationship, Lily had always been the stronger one, the dominant one, and Anna had grown up in her sister's shadow. But Oliver is his son, Anna finally blurted out, her voice almost pleading. You can't treat him like a rival. Lily spun around, her blue eyes icy. You don't understand, Anna. Love alone isn't enough to keep a man. You have to make him believe there's no one else but you. And for David, that someone else is Isabella's memory. Every time he looks at Oliver, he's dragged back there. I won't let that continue. I held my breath behind the door. Every word Lily spoke made my skin crawl. Love, when twisted into control, stops being love. It becomes a chain, a burden, and sometimes a danger. Anna lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting together, her voice barely a whisper. I'm scared, Lily. I'm afraid you'll do something wrong. Lily laughed softly, but it was no happy laugh. It rang dry, brittle, like the crack of breaking glass. Wrong. The only mistake is letting the past haunt the present. I will not let Isabella win, not even in death. Anna shrank back, nodding timidly, her small frame curling inward as though she wanted to disappear. I could see the fear in her posture, but also her helplessness. I stepped away, my heart pounding. The fragments of suspicion I had been collecting began to lock into place, forming a whole picture. Lily was not merely a young woman insecure about her place in her husband's heart. She was carrying an obsession, one that could drive her to dangerous acts. And Oliver, innocent, blameless Oliver, was at the very center of that obsession. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling. I thought of Isabella, of the promise I had once made. It was now clear. This was no longer about disliking my new daughter-in-law. This was a real threat to my grandson in the dark. Lily's words echoed again. He's the one who reminds David of the past every single day. I understood then. From this moment forward, every step I took had to be cautious. I couldn't reveal that I had overheard her, but neither could I remain still. I was old, but if it came to it, I would be the last shield between Oliver and the storm brewing in Lily's restless heart. That evening, the chandeliers in the glass garden hall still glittered, and the jazz band played as if the word darkness had never existed. I sat at table 6, forcing myself to look like any ordinary mother and grandmother enjoying her son's wedding. But every nerve in my body was taut. The unease that had haunted me for weeks was sharper than ever. At the far end of the hall, I noticed the makeshift kitchen station, where waiters passed back and forth with gleaming silver trays. Normally, it was nothing remarkable, but tonight, I watched more closely, and it was there that the truth began to show. Marcus, a young waiter, slim, with black hair falling over his forehead, had just received an order slip from the shift manager. I saw him frown, then reach into the pocket of his apron. He pulled out another slip, also for table 6, my table, Oliver's table. I couldn't hear from where I sat, but I recognized the hesitation on his face. Marcus bit his lip, glancing between the two pieces of paper. Then, after a pause, He stepped back into the corner of the kitchen, pulled out his phone, and tapped quickly. No one else noticed. The guests were too busy laughing, drinking champagne, taking pictures with the bride and groom. But I knew that boy had just done something important. Only later would I understand. Marcus had been handed two entirely contradictory tickets. The first, with a signature and an official stamp, read clearly, "Nut-free, no nuts, specially for a guest with allergies." But the second, slipped in later, bore the chilling words, "Almond brittle, almonds, the very thing that could kill Oliver." I remembered hearing once that Marcus had a strange habit, always photographing order slips before sending them to the kitchen. The staff laughed at him, saying he was paranoid. But I knew at once that habit had come from a wound. Marcus had nearly been blamed at a previous wedding when a dish was switched, a guest poisoned, and the fault almost pinned on him. Since then, he never let himself be without proof. And because of that habit, tonight, he had become an unwilling witness. I didn't know how he would act, but I could tell just from the way he quickly tucked his phone away, his eyes flickering with alarm. Something was wrong. Someone had interfered. I sat motionless, my smile fixed as another toast was raised to David and Lily. But inside, the waves began to rise. For weeks, I had only my instincts, Oliver's pleading eyes, scattered memories of Isabella. But now, the first piece of black and white evidence had appeared. One slip said nut-free, the other said almond brittle, and my grandson's life dangled between those two lines of ink. I glanced at Oliver beside me, his face glowing as Grace whispered something in his ear. He laughed, a rare, innocent giggle that filled me with joy and sorrow at once. He had no idea that only a few steps away, someone was plotting to silence that laughter forever. I closed my eyes briefly, my fingers clutching the old rosary Isabella had once given me. In my mind, her words echoed, "If anything happens to me, please protect Oliver in my place." And I whispered in my heart, "Isabella, don't worry. I will never let anyone touch him." I knew I could no longer sit still. The unease had grown beyond instinct. It now glared at me through Marcus's eyes. The young waiter passed by my table, his tray of glasses trembling slightly in his hands. For just a second, his gaze met mine, and I caught the signal. "I have something to tell you." I leaned forward, pretending to adjust the tablecloth, just long enough to catch that look. Marcus gave a faint nod, then slipped back toward the service hallway. I told Grace to stay with Oliver, then rose as if to take a casual stroll around the hall. The guests kept laughing, drinking, clinking glasses. No one paid attention. In the shadowed corner near the kitchen, Marcus waited. When he saw me, he lowered his head and whispered quickly, "Madam, I don't know what to do, but I think you should see this." He pulled his phone from his pocket and lit up the screen. Two photos appeared side by side. The first slip, table 6, nut-free with the manager's signature and official stamp. The second slip, newer, for the same table, but the note had been changed to, "At almond brittle." The hall seemed to spin around me. The words leapt off the screen, toxic as poison. Just a few altered lines, enough to turn a dessert into a weapon. I was once blamed for a mix-up. Marcus stammered, his voice shaking. "Since then, I always take photos before sending orders to the kitchen. This time, something's wrong. I swear the original slip was nut-free. This later one, I don't know where it came from." I drew a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Have you told anyone else?" Marcus shook his head. "No. I'm afraid they won't believe me. If the manager thinks I messed things up, I could lose my job." I laid my hand on his thin arm, meeting his eyes. "You did the right thing, and you may have just saved a child's life in that instant." I saw the trembling in his eyes ease, as though someone had finally acknowledged the truth he carried. I stepped back, my fingers tightening around the old rosary in my pocket. Everything was clear now. This was no accident. It was a plan. Someone wanted Oliver to eat that almond-laced dessert. I remembered Lily's cold stare before Isabella's photo, her whispered words to Anna, the fear etched into Oliver's face whenever he was forced near her. Piece by piece, they all aligned into a sharp, unmistakable blade. I returned to the table, forcing my steps steady though my heart pounded. Oliver looked up at me, his eyes searching. I smiled at him and laid a hand on his shoulder. In my heart I whispered, "My dear, I will not let history repeat itself. No one will be allowed to take your life. No one." The hall buzzed on, the jazz still playing. But for me, everything had changed. Now every step a server took toward our table, every tray of pastries that passed by, was a potential danger. I knew plainly, if I relaxed for even a single second, tragedy would strike. I sat up straight, my eyes fixed on the kitchen exit. If the rest of the world was busy raising glasses to celebrate the newlyweds, then I would be the lone sentinel and old guard who would never abandon his post. And I vowed, by everything left in my life, I would not let tragedy happen again. I cannot tell how many minutes I spent watching the gleaming trays of desserts leave the kitchen one after another. Time stretched endlessly. Cold sweat beaded on my palms, my heart pounding like a war drum. Then the moment came. A group of waiters emerged from the kitchen door, trays of desserts neatly arranged, the scent of caramel and almonds trailing in the air. I sprang to my feet. The chair screeched as it toppled. "Stop." My voice rang out, stronger than I expected, drowning the jazz horn that had been swelling. The music cut off abruptly, as if sliced through with a knife. The hall fell into a suffocating silence. The laughter that had filled the room seconds before vanished, giving way to hundreds of eyes focused on me. A guest whispered, astonished, "What's happening?" I inhaled deeply, lifted my chin, and pointed straight at the dessert trays. "Do not serve the desserts." Immediately, the room rocked. The waiters froze in the aisle, hands trembling. The spoons set on the tables suddenly felt out of place. David rushed over from the center of the hall, his face pale. He grabbed my arm, voice full of worry. "Mother, what is this? Why are you doing this?" I looked at my son. His expression was as bewildered as a child pulled from a pleasant dream. I forced my voice steady, holding back the tremor. "If those desserts are served, Oliver will be in danger," the guests murmured. Some tittered awkwardly, thinking I was overreacting. But I stood firm, refusing to back down. I have lived long enough to know when to sacrifice decorum for a life. David frowned and pulled me aside, his tone urgent. "Mum, this is my wedding. Do you know what you're doing?" I looked deep into the eyes of the son I raised, eyes that had once overflowed with joy, and once with tears. Now they seemed blind to the danger before them. "Son," I said slowly, with a hard edge, "I don't care whose wedding this is. If someone intentionally changed Oliver's order slip, if there is almond in those desserts, then a single mouthful could kill your son right here at this table." The atmosphere thickened. I saw David startle, his hand gripping my arm as if seeking something to hold on to. He glanced toward Oliver, who sat close to Grace, his face confused and unaware. In that instant, I knew there was no turning back. I had chosen to stand, to shatter the perfect sheen of the celebration. If I had to be the one who ruined the wedding, then so be it. Because Oliver's life was worth more than all the crystal chandeliers and hollow congratulations. The hall seemed frozen, hundreds of eyes glued to David and me. No music, no laughter, only the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I opened my handbag and took out the two slips Marcus had shown me. One was creased, clearly marked nut-free. The other, with fresher ink, coldly printed at almond brittle. I placed both into David's hands. "Look, son, this is the proof." David took the slips, his eyes scanning each word, his lips moving but no sound coming out. He read them again and again. His face went pale, sweat beading at his temples. I could clearly see the moment the truth struck. No, "This can't be," he murmured, voice choked. I put my hand on his arm, squeezed, forcing him to look up at me. "Do you remember? The doctors sent an allergy warning email right after Oliver's anaphylactic episode. They wrote clearly, absolutely no almonds are to appear in his meals. You forwarded that email to the restaurant yourself." David's eyes snapped awake. I knew memories were swirling in his head. The night Oliver was rushed to the hospital, the siren wailing, the little hand trembling in his father's. And now, the words on those order slips were betraying all that vigilance. At that moment, the kitchen door flew open. The venue manager strode in, black suit sharp, face grave. He walked quickly over and took the slips from David's hand. His eyes flicked across them, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. This is extremely serious," he said, low and heavy. "The first slip carries my signature and stamp. The second does not." A murmur swept the hall. Some guests shook their heads. Others covered their mouths in shock. I stood tall. My voice rang out, steady and no longer trembling. Someone deliberately forged it. And if it hadn't been stopped in time, a child could have died right at this table. David swayed and had to grip a nearby chair. He looked around, panic in his eyes, then stopped at Oliver. The boy sat close to Grace, eyes wide and not yet understanding. But his instincts told him a terrible thing had just been averted. The venue manager inhaled deeply and turned to his staff. "Take all the dessert trays back to the kitchen. Nothing is to be served until I have checked everything from the start." I heard guests breathe out in relief, but no one felt like eating. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The crystal lights still gleamed, but under that glow the bare truth had been exposed. Someone had tried to kill Oliver. In the simplest way, by changing an order slip. I glanced at Lily. For a moment her smile faltered. Her lips pressed tight. Her hand clenched the wine glass until her knuckles whitened. But when she saw everyone watching, she quickly forced a pale smile and pretended to be as shocked as the rest. As for me, I knew. I had seen it. And now I had proof. While the dessert trays were still under control, I thought the danger had been temporarily averted. But then, across the vast hall, another waiter, perhaps not yet informed by the manager, stepped out from the kitchen carrying a small tray of gleaming caramel-coated desserts. He was headed straight for table 4, only a few steps away from my table and Oliver's. In an instant, my heart dropped into my stomach. Each step the young waiter took sounded like the count of a ticking clock, bringing him closer to catastrophe. Then a shadow lunged forward. Grace. She sprang up from her seat, crossed the aisle, and thrust her hand out to block the tray. Glasses on the table trembled as everyone turned in shock. Grace's voice rang out, decisive. "Don't serve that. Those desserts will kill my nephew." The hall erupted. Whispers, gasps, a few sharp exclamations. The band stopped playing. The final note hung and died. The young waiter froze, his face ashen. He stammered, I was just following the order slip." Grace turned toward him and pointed at Oliver, her tone firmer than I had ever heard from my gentle foster daughter. "The boy is severely allergic to almonds. One bite and he could die." The guests around table recoiled. A middle-aged woman clutched her chest. A young couple at the next table hugged each other, whispering, "My God, is this true? Who would do such a thing?" The gossip spread like wildfire. A forged order? A plot to kill a child? Unbelievable. I saw Oliver curled into his seat, wide-eyed, clutching his red toy car. His gaze clung to Grace like a lifeline in rough seas. I rose and stepped to her side, placing my hand on Grace's shoulder to lend strength. Part of me hurt. Part of me swelled with pride. My child had done what even I, a lifetime lived, had hesitated to do. She had stood between danger and Oliver without a moment's thought. David rushed over from the other side, his face stunned. "Grace, what are you doing?" Grace turned, her eyes blazing with resolve, her voice steady. "I'm protecting your son. If you won't do it, I will. Her words made the hall shudder once more. Some guests nearby nodded, whispering in agreement. The tension in the air was like a taut string about to snap. I knew then. The moment Grace had blocked that tray, there was no turning back. The truth had to come out, even if it shattered the carefully staged splendor of this celebration. The hall was taut as a drum. The tray of desserts hung frozen before Grace, the waiter's hands trembling so that the silver spoon on the tray rattled. Whispers and murmurs multiplied into a stifling roar. Then Lily stepped forward. She gave a thin smile, her voice light as wind but full of sarcasm. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't worry. This is just a nasty prank. Someone must want to ruin the ceremony. A few guests forced a polite laugh, trying to reassure themselves, but most exchanged wary looks. Lily's words, instead of easing the tension, only made it knot tighter. I stood motionless, my eyes fixed on her. Beneath Lily's smooth tone, I could see the wine glass trembling in her hand, her fingers clutching it until the knuckles turned white. Her lips were pressed together. The smile she kept on her face was strained, like a mask about to crack. A nasty prank. I shouted silently in my head. Since when was a child's life a prank? I stepped forward, my voice clear, cutting through the buzzing. If this is a prank, it's a cruel one, and I don't see anyone laughing here. Heads around the room began to nod. An elderly man with a white beard shook his head and said loudly enough for many to hear, "How can you joke about an allergy that can kill? No one can treat this lightly." Lily glanced around. Her smile faltered. She turned to David, voice edged with accusation. "Darling, you won't let people misunderstand me, will you?" David looked from Lily to me, then at Oliver huddled against Grace. His gaze wavered, but before he could answer, the venue manager returned, his face grave. He raised the to-order slips in his hand, speaking in a solemn tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just confirmed this. One of these slips is forged, and if the forged slip had been used, the consequences would have been dire." The hall erupted. Conversation thundered in for directions. I saw Lily bite her lip, her hand trembling more. Yet she forced a pale smile. "As I said," Lily said, her voice sharper now, "someone wants to sabotage this wedding." I realized that every time she tried to deny it, her voice grew tenser, and her insecurity showed through more plainly. To me, that was more frightening than silence. The atmosphere in the hall was now like a thin pane of glass. One small push, and everything would shatter, shards flying everywhere. No one spared. I tightened my grip on Oliver, feeling his little heart hammering beneath his vest. Glancing at Grace, I saw her steady, resolute gaze, ready to face whatever came. I knew the breaking point was near, and when it arrived, there would be no turning back. Just as the hall quivered like fragile glass on the verge of shattering, Marcus stepped forward. The young, thin waiter, his face beaded with sweat, hands trembling with fear, looked as if he longed to vanish. Yet he drew a deep breath and pressed on. In his hand was his phone. He raised it, his voice unsteady but resolute. I have proof. I took a picture of the order slip before I sent it to the kitchen." A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. Guests turned, craning their necks. The venue manager frowned and beckoned Marcus closer. The young man handed over the phone, his fingers shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. On the screen, the photo was clear. The first order slip, boldly marked nut-free. The time stamp matched the moment the kitchen had received the order. The captain's signature neat, the stamp crisp and genuine. Marcus swiped to the next photo. This time, the words "at almond brittle" stood out starkly, but the captain's signature was warped. Nothing like the real one. The time stamp was nearly 10 minutes later. "You can all see." Marcus's voice cracked, but he forced the words out. The second slip wasn't signed by the captain. I compared them. "It's a forgery." Sharp intakes of breath echoed across the room. Some guests whispered in outrage, "My God, someone really tried this. Forged a signature? That's outrageous." David snatched the phone from Marcus, staring at the screen. His eyes widened, his face stunned. Then, as if unable to restrain himself, he roared, his voice reverberating through the hall. I specified it in the emails, in the calls, in every order slip. Nut-free, absolutely nut-free. What is this? Who did this? The fury in his voice silenced the hall. No more whispers, no more murmurs, only ragged breathing, and my own heart pounding against my ribs. I turned to Oliver. He had curled into himself, clutching his little red car, eyes wet but fixed on his father. In that gaze was panic mingled with hope. Hope that this time, his father would stand with him. David lowered his hand, his face flushed red. He turned to the venue manager, his voice thick but firm. I want to know who slipped in this fake order. Right now. The venue manager nodded, his brows furrowed tight. Clearing his throat, he turned to the guests and raised both order slips high. Someone here tampered with the process. This is no mistake. This is a crime. The hall erupted, chairs scraping, angry murmurs rippling through the air. I could feel it. The atmosphere had shifted completely. This was no longer a wedding celebration. It was a courtroom, improvised and raw, where the truth was about to be laid bare. And I knew, soon, every suspicious gaze would converge on a single person. The venue manager tightened his grip on the two slips, his voice low and sharp, striking like a gavel. This was forgery. Beyond any doubt. The entire hall held its breath. The faint clink of wine glasses echoed like shattering glass. The elegant desserts gleaming on their silver trays now looked like bombs. Wrapped in sugar and caramel, Lily shot to her feet, her silk gown swaying under the chandeliers. Her face still wore a smile, but her voice cut like a blade. Please, everyone, calm down. This is clearly a plot to ruin my wedding with David. Someone staged all of this, and now they want to pin it on me. Some guests exchanged uneasy looks, but most stayed silent. In that moment, they all seemed to feel what I did. Her denial was too fast, too rehearsed. I watched closely, every twitch of her body. The hand holding her wine glass trembled so hard the liquid sloshed over the rim. Her lips pressed tight, then forced into a crooked smile. I could see it. She was cornered to ruin a wedding. An older guest spoke, his voice heavy with doubt. I've never heard of any plot that would target a child. Whispers surged again. A young woman leaned toward her husband and muttered, only someone truly afraid would react like that. David stood frozen, his eyes bloodshot, his grip crushing the order slips into a crumpled mess. He turned to Lily, his voice ragged. Lily, do you know anything about this? The question hung in the air, heavy as stone. Lily shook her head violently, her smile strained. Brittle. Of course not. Do you really think I'd ever harm Oliver? You know I love that boy. At that moment, Oliver pressed himself tightly against Grace, his wide eyes shining. He said nothing, but his gaze alone was enough. Enough for many to read the truth. The boy did not believe her, and if the child himself didn't believe, then who could believe on his behalf? The guest's eyes began to turn on Lily, sharp and relentless. Whispers circled, heads shook, lips pressed tight in disapproval. I saw Lily's shoulders stiffen, her smile cracking like paint peeling off an old wall. The venue manager's voice rang out again, cold and final. We will investigate this to the very end, but it is already clear. Someone tried to slip almonds into the meal of a child with a severe allergy. This is no joke. This is a deliberate crime. The words struck like the final blade. The atmosphere in the hall grew heavy, thick, ready to shatter. And I knew the fragile thread holding this wedding together had been stretched to its final limit. The wedding hall fell into a silence so taut I could hear the faint clink of a wine glass set down at the far end of the room, all eyes still fixed on Lily, while she struggled to maintain a twisted smile, as if that mask could still shield her from the truth bleeding through with every second. And then, From the far end of the tables came an unexpected sound, a choked sob. I turned and saw Anna, Lily's younger sister, the fragile girl who had been nothing more than a shadow all evening, trailing behind her sister like an attendant, barely speaking a word. Now her narrow shoulders shook, both hands covering her face, and tears streamed uncontrollably. I can't take it anymore. Anna's voice broke, trembling through the hall. Gasps rippled. Lily's head whipped around, eyes wide, as she rushed toward her sister. Her voice sharp though still coated in feigned sweetness. Anna, what are you doing? Don't you dare spout nonsense in front of everyone. But Anna stumbled back, sobbing, as if the weight of her secret had finally crushed her. No, it was my sister. She lifted her head, voice catching between sobs, yet loud enough for all to hear. My sister gave me that slip, told me to hand it to the waiter. The hall erupted like a storm. Guests gaped, some covered their mouths in horror. I didn't know how dangerous it was. Anna cried, clutching her face, trembling all over. I thought it was just a minor adjustment. I never knew it meant almonds. Lily's face drained of color, her hand clutching her beaded clutch so tightly the knuckles turned white. She lunged forward, seizing her sister's shoulders, her voice shrill and cracking. Stop it, Anna. You don't know what you're saying. But Anna shoved her away, the first act of defiance in her life. With tears pouring down her face, she looked around the hall, her voice breaking yet clearer than ever. I'm sorry. I truly didn't know. But the truth is, that order slip came from my sister's hand. For several seconds, no one spoke. The hall felt swept hollow, as if all the air had been stolen away. David stood frozen, staring at Lily in disbelief, while Oliver clung to Grace, his small face tight with fear. And I knew the curtain had been torn wide open. Whatever excuses Lily might attempt, the seed of doubt had already taken root and spread through the hall. Once the truth slipped from the lips of her closest kin, there was no pulling trust back together again. Lily gripped her sister's shoulders tighter, her wide blue eyes wild, her voice cracking with desperation. Stop it. Don't you dare slander me in front of everyone. Have you gone mad, Anna? The hall roared with chaos. Some guests shrank back in shock. Others shook their heads in disbelief. David stood like stone, his arms hanging loose, eyes shattered with horror. Anna broke free, tears streaming, her voice trembling yet resolute. I'm not lying. You always feared Oliver. Because every time you saw him, you remembered Isabella. You told me yourself, didn't you? It's him who keeps David from ever forgetting the past. Her confession cracked through the hall like a hammer, shattering glass already lined with fractures. I looked at Lily. Her refined beauty was now distorted, the perfect mask shattered. Her lips trembled, the false smile gone, leaving only anger and fear. You're lying, Lily screamed, her voice breaking, her eyes darting around the hall in search of support. This is all made up. Everyone can see. You're just jealous of me. But no one nodded. Instead, suspicion, contempt, and pity poured down on her from every direction. The entire room had become an invisible courtroom, and Lily stood in the center of judgment. Anna sobbed, her hands covering her face, then lowered them and looked straight at everyone, her voice raw from tears. I never wanted to hurt Oliver. I just thought, if I helped her, maybe she'd stop tormenting herself, stop losing control. But the truth is, she swallowed hard, turning toward David. She couldn't stand it when Oliver laughed, when he looked too much like Isabella. That sentence laid everything bare. There was no way back. David looked as if he had been punched straight in the chest. He froze, gasping, his eyes blazing yet shimmering with tears. I knew, watching him, that his heart was tearing in two, one half clinging to the memory of Isabella, the other breaking under the raw betrayal revealed on the very day he thought he had found new happiness. Oliver pressed closer against Grace, his tiny hand trembling. He couldn't fully understand the words of the adults, but he knew he was at the center of the storm. And that was what hurt me most. I drew a long breath, steadying my voice to pierce through the crushing silence. The truth is clear. A mother is gone, and a child has only us left to protect him. No one has the right to make him pay the price for someone else's insecurities. The hall fell silent. My words were the final nail sealing the coffin of trust in Lily. And Lily. She staggered, her eyes vacant. Her lips moved, but no words came. The naked truth stood exposed, and the whole world had seen it. The venue manager stood in the middle of the hall, the 2 order slips trembling in his hands beneath the crystal lights. He drew a deep breath, then declared, his voice booming, leaving no room for doubt. I confirm. The second ticket is a forgery. This is not only a severe violation of restaurant protocol, but a crime that endangered human life. The sound in the hall seemed to vanish, leaving a deadly silence. The guests who only moments ago were laughing, clinking glasses now looked at one another with eyes full of fear and anger. I saw David as if all the blood had drained from his body. His face was pale, his eyes vacant, his hand crushing the order slip until it crumpled. His lips trembled but no sound came out. In that instant, he no longer looked like a groom, but like a man who had just been stripped of everything. I reached to touch my son's arm, but David recoiled, stumbling a few steps. His heart was shattering right before my eyes. I knew, in that moment, he was reliving it all. Isabella, the past, the loss, and now the ultimate agony of realizing that the woman he had chosen as his new wife was the very danger threatening his son. I turned to Oliver. The boy understood enough to feel the storm swirling around him. He burrowed into Grace's arms, his small hands clutching her as if she were a fortress. His eyes brimmed with tears, glistening under the lights, asking a question he dared not speak aloud. Grandma, why does it have to be me? Grace bent down, holding him close, her hand stroking his hair with tender reassurance. Though her own eyes were rimmed red, I knew, in that moment, Grace had become the only anchor Oliver had left. The guests began to murmur, whispers scattering like knives slicing through the suffocating air. Unbelievable. Right in the middle of a wedding, a child nearly killed because of jealousy. Horrifying. I looked around and saw the stares drilling into Lily's stares cold as verdicts. Those who once praised her beauty now turned away, shaking their heads. That is the weight of truth when it bursts forth. There is no escaping it. I whispered in my heart, as if speaking to Isabella. My daughter, rest assured, the truth has stood on Oliver's side. No one can deny it now. And yet, even with everything laid bare, my chest still felt heavy as stone, because I knew this collapse was not Lily's alone. It would drag David down with it, drag our family, drag every fragile hope he once clung to. That was the real pain. I knew it was time to say aloud what everyone was already thinking but dared not voice. I rose to my feet, stepped forward, spine straight, my voice ringing out steady and unshaken. Whoever dares to harm my grandson will never be family. The words thundered across the hall, slicing through the suffocating air. I stared straight at Lily, unblinking. In my gaze, there was no trace of leniency, only the fierce, immovable shield of a grandmother's love. Guests shook their heads in unison. A few voices rose, shameful, to target even a child, unforgivable. Their eyes turned to Lily cold, contemptuous daggers piercing the glittering mask she had once worn. The woman who had been the admired center of the celebration, in a heartbeat, became the cursed name on everyone's lips. Lily tried to hold her smile, but it was lifeless. Her lips quivered, her eyes darted frantically, searching for a hand to pull her out. None came. Even David stood motionless, heavy as stone, his eyes laden with disappointment too deep for words. The venue manager stepped forward, his voice firm. Madam, please leave the hall immediately. Lily gave a brittle laugh, feigning defiance. You'll all regret believing these lies. I did nothing wrong. But when two security staff approached, their hands firm but not rough on her arms, her smile shattered. Her face twisted. Her eyes widened in panic. "No, don't touch me," she struggled. But no one defended her. Her heels struck the floor with sharp echoes. But this time not to impress. They marked her retreat in humiliation. Guests watched in silence, some even turning away, unwilling to see more. Oliver clung tightly to Grace, his eyes still wet but shining with relief. He whispered, so softly only I could hear, "Grandma, she's gone now, right?" I bent down, kissed his soft hair, and murmured back, "Yes, my boy, she's gone." When the hall doors slammed shut behind Lily, I knew a dark chapter of this family had just ended, but I also knew the cracks it left behind would not heal easily. The hall that had once glittered like a crystal garden now lay in ruins, more desolate than any wedding I had ever seen. Flowers lay scattered across the floor, glasses of wine abandoned on tables, guests slipping away in silence. No more laughter, no more blessings. All that remained was heaviness and fragments. In the middle of it all, David let his handkerchief fall, his shoulders trembling. Slowly, he stepped toward Oliver. The boy shrank back, clinging tightly to Grace's arms, his eyes still filled with the fear carved deeper into him that day. David froze, then suddenly dropped to his knees. The sound of his knees hitting the floor was soft, but in that suffocating silence, it rang like a bell. "Oliver." His voice was hoarse, caught in his throat. "Son, forgive me." Oliver looked up, lips trembling, tears streaming down his young face. For so long, he had waited for his father to look straight at him, to hear the voice of his heart. And now, at last, that moment had come. "Dad." Oliver burst into tears, then flung himself into his father's arms, clutching him so tightly David could barely breathe. David wept too, tears falling hot and bitter into his son's soft hair. He whispered, "I was wrong. I was blind. I didn't see the fear in your eyes. From now on, I promise, I will never let anyone hurt you again." I turned away, my own tears blurring my vision. In that wreckage, perhaps for the first time since Isabella's death, father and son truly found each other again. Grace sat down beside them, her hand resting gently on Oliver's back, as if to remind him there was still a steady anchor. Oliver burrowed into both his father and his aunt, crying but nodding faintly, as if he finally believed he was safe. I sank into a nearby chair, watching them, my heart torn yet soothed. The storm had stolen the splendor of a wedding, but it had given back something far more precious: the bond of father and child. The family we had thought was lost. The jazz had stopped. The guests were gone, but in that empty space, the sobs of David and Oliver echoed so raw, so real. They shattered every illusion that had come before. And I knew, from that moment on, we would no longer build this family on glitter and pretense. We would rebuild it on love, and on the courage to face the truth. And to me, that was the true beginning of a new chapter. After that chaotic night, our house fell silent for a long time. The radiant wedding photos, meant to be printed and displayed everywhere now, remained locked inside USB drives that were never opened. No one spoke of the big day. Instead, we tried to mend what had been broken piece by piece with silence, with simple meals, and with hugs that lingered longer than before. David grew quieter. He spent more time at home instead of burying himself in work. Perhaps, after facing the near loss of his son, his priorities shifted. I often caught him sitting in the living room, eyes fixed on Oliver as he drew pictures with Grace, his expression a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Oliver gradually regained his smile, though some nights he still woke crying out "Mom" in his sleep. In those moments, David would rush to hold him, while Grace quietly warmed a cup of milk. No words were needed, but I knew in Oliver's heart, safety was slowly returning, because now he had 3 arms to hold him: his grandmother's, his father's, and Aunt Grace's. One evening, a few weeks later, We gathered around the dinner table. No flowers, no candles, just the stew I had cooked from Isabella's old recipe, and nut-free cookies Grace had baked. Oliver ate quietly, unusually well behaved, his eyes shining as though he were carrying a thought too big for his small frame. Then, all of a sudden, he put down his spoon, looked straight at his father, then at Grace. His voice was tiny but clear, like a declaration. I want Aunt Grace to be my mom. The room went silent. My heart clenched. David froze, his trembling hand resting on the table. Grace's eyes widened, her lips parted, but no words came out. Oliver went on, his cheeks flushed, his voice wavering with emotion. I know, Mama Isabella is gone, but I want a mother I can hug every night, someone I can tell about school, someone who makes me feel safe. Aunt Grace has always been there for me. I want her to be my mom. Tears filled my eyes, not from pain, but because for the first time, I saw Oliver brave enough to speak the truth of his heart. David covered his face with his hand. When he lowered it, his eyes were wet. He turned to Grace, his voice hoarse and trembling. Did you hear that? My son, our son, what he just said. Grace broke down, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her eyes glowed with a love and gratitude I had never seen before. She reached out and pulled Oliver into her arms, whispering through her sobs, I know, Mommy is so happy to hear you say that. David looked at the two of them, then bent down and gathered both his son and Grace into his embrace. For the first time in years, I saw his shoulders shake, not from despair, but from relief. I sat there, watching the three of them wrapped in each other's arms, my heart shattering and mending into a new shape. I whispered, as if sending a message to Isabella, my daughter, rest easy. Oliver still has a home, a true family, not built on marriage certificates or lavish ceremonies, but on hugs, on honest tears, and the courage to protect one another. Slowly, I lifted my voice, closing the story that the wedding hall had once witnessed. A real family isn't built from grand weddings, but from love and the courage to protect each other. David looked up, nodding firmly, his eyes brimming with gratitude. Grace held Oliver even tighter, as if letting go would make him vanish again. And Oliver, for the first time in many months, smiled fully, a smile no longer shadowed, but filled only with light. That night, as I stepped out onto the porch, the wind drifted softly through the rose garden, and I realized none of us remembered the so-called wedding day anymore, but all of us remembered the moment Oliver spoke those words, simple, yet so true. That was the real wedding, one without white gowns or diamond rings, but filled with love and unconditional protection. And I knew, from then on, a new chapter had truly begun. A chapter where we no longer ran from the shadows, but learned how to light them together in life. There are weddings that shine brightly only to shatter, and vows sworn under heaven that crumble into dust. But a true family doesn't need those things to exist. Family is when we dare to say no to what is wrong, dare to stand up for each other, and dare to give love, even when the past has left scars. Because in the end, a child does not need much, only to know that no matter how cruel the outside world may be, within the arms of family, they will always be safe. My dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, I invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts or your own experiences. And don't forget to subscribe, so we can continue to listen, to tell, and to live through stories together, stories that may be yours, or perhaps someone you once knew.